Good afternoon all, and thank you Global Relay for having us. I don't think we need to introduce us again because you've done it so well. We thought we'll share our thoughts with you on SMCR. As Alex said, we were going to talk about the new paper. It was supposed to come out in June, but it didn't because of the general election. But this is a topic that we have kept being asked by our clients, regardless of what sector, banking, asset management, hedge funds, it is being asked. So we thought we'll cover it because I'm sure you'll have lots of different questions. And I'll just quickly run through the quick background, what's happened, because I'm sure you know all of this, but just kind of quick rundown. SMCR was established in 2016 as a response to the LIBOR scandal and the financial crisis. And then it was the political and regulatory response, and that's why it was created. And then it was initially applied to banks, credit institutions, PRA designated firms, and then it got extended to the insurers, solo regulated firms, etc. So what has been the recent developments? As we know, last year there has been quite a lot of papers, a lot of industry discussions as well. So let's have a look at the discussion papers. The discussion paper was as part of the Edinburgh reform that it was mentioned, and then the discussion paper was published by the FCA and PRA, and then call for evidence was obviously published by the HM Treasury. There were about 22 questions, the key questions that the FCA PRA discussion paper mentions. We're not going to go through that because we've got 20 minutes, and this is quite a big topic. So I'm going to ask Mark some questions because Mark's been an SMF, both 16 and 17, since the inception of SMCR, of some of the key questions that we've been asked. And I'm sure you might want to add some questions. That's absolutely fine. So the first question I'm going to ask is the challenges in regulatory references. And this was very much talked about in the discussion paper, as well as the industry papers, as you well know. How are we making progress on that, and how can we improve, do you think?
It's hard. It's an area of focus. I actually, just personally, I wonder what you actually get from this massive paper trail and follow through. A lot of the issues that you want to know about aren't going to ever end up on the regulatory reference. Some of the disciplinary actions are kind of softer ones inside the firm. Really bad stuff, yes, but you probably know about that anyway. And so I think it is. I think it's a layer of bureaucracy. I think there are firms that are obviously outside the scope of the referencing rule, and there are delays and kind of blandness even with the rules. So the more they can do to tighten that up, I don't think anyone's going to be allowed to push it so that you have a broader truth. When Alex and I started, people would have made phone calls and chatted about what actually happened with the person that you're about to employ, and that the kind of regulation oddly has steered us into a kind of more bland area, unfortunately, is my view.
So if we hire candidates from, i.e. non-financial industry, or from outside of UK, and they don't hold the same kind of audit trail of that candidate, what should firms do? Because they don't have that information, and the FCA expects you to.
It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot you can do nowadays to find out and do background checks. You can get third-party firms to do background checks, and I think that is all sensible work. You need the paper trail, so you need to get the bland reference from the overseas firm, definitely. But again, I think you always need to do your own research, to be honest.
Okay. And one other point that is mentioned in the discussion paper is the growth in expectations of the senior managers, and both new and the emerging risks. And we discussed it before the panel. This is quite a topical issue because it's happening across the board. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, the last 12 months of my life have been really good because I haven't been registered as a senior manager. So I think it's, I won't do a hands up. I don't know how many senior managers we have here, but it's a dangerous thing. It feels like certainly when I was doing it, I did it for a long time. It feels like a burden. There are a lot of responsibilities. It's important to document everything properly. And the regulator is pretty demanding in certain circumstances. If you ever go through an investigation, and God forbid you do, it's scary stuff. It's all your emails, all of that stuff. And the senior manager is the focal point of that. I mean, it amused me when the surveillance guys were falling over themselves to become senior managers or have their own special category of senior manager, because genuinely I wouldn't want that. So if you're going into the role, be really careful. I can chat to you afterwards about the myriad of things that I think you have to do if you are in that role, but it's difficult.
Another key topic is delays in SMF approvals. We all know there's been quite a lot of changeover within FCA, but not just the staff, but also their location. They've lost quite a lot of staff as a result of that. Not sure that's their excuse, but however, it creates lots of difficult challenges for the firms because they have to find interim, but also they need to wait until it's been approved, right? There's been some suggestions in some of the industry papers that maybe we should narrow it down to some of the key ExCo members, CEO, COO, CFO, etc. What's your thought on that?
I mean, I think they need to make it easier. I mean, the trouble with the way the regime works is if the CEO doesn't tag someone, the CEO gets it. So the firm is going to be enthusiastic about getting someone in that SM role as quickly as possible, irrespective of what the rule says. I've actually done the interim role in interesting circumstances twice, and that itself is a really odd situation to be in because you've got all the responsibility, but you've got none of the kind of genuine traction of having the role. So that's another. Be careful if you're going to go into an interim role. I think wouldn't it be good if in that situation the FCA could do all its work as quickly as possible. But if the firm could just tag someone without having to go through the rigmarole of actually registering them in that interim capacity, and you do wonder sometimes that someone comes in from another firm, there's a massive delay in processing it, but the MLRO who stands in as the CCO is registered within a week. The whole timing seems very odd to me. Take care. That's the rule.
There's also been some suggestions. Could the industry rely on reliance? So if other reputable firms, for example, as a NED, and this candidate is coming to your firm, and he or she has done a similar role elsewhere, a NED in a similar function, could that firm rely on the reliance that previous firm has conducted?
I think there's real scope. I think there is real scope for reliance just to smooth the process, because I just wonder what the FCA are actually getting out of the work they're doing, what they're actually getting. I mean, I think high-risk firms, high-risk people, the FCA should be looking at that and interviewing those people. I get all that. If a firm's on the watch list, of course, they're going to interview every senior manager. But if not, it would be good, again, if firms could place some reliance on the fact that someone's been registered somewhere else, or they've got a provable CV and they can move straight into the role. I mean, a lot of this stuff is tick boxing anyway. An asset management compliance officer moves to be an investment bank compliance officer. They don't usually get turned down. It's all clean record. So I don't know what the FCA's process is when they're doing that, and therefore I don't understand why it takes more than 12 weeks.
The last question I'm going to ask in this discussion paper is the 12-week rule, which I know a lot of people have mentioned it to me. This is a concern. Just practical utility of it, because everybody surpasses it. Because to find the relevant, appropriate SMF to replace within that period is almost impossible, depending on the seniority. But then you have to go through the approval process, or someone needs to step in an interim place and also whether that person could hold prescribed responsibilities.
Yeah, I kind of talked about that earlier, right?
Yeah.
I think FCA should just be more relaxed about how that holding role works, and they should actually be sympathetic to the person doing it, because they're going to tag the CEO anyway. So if the MLRO steps in to be the compliance officer, then I think that's helpful to the FCA, it's helpful to the firm, but that person is taking a huge whack load of risk and probably not getting paid for it, to do that infill stunt. And I think, you know, a little bit of sympathy and practical approach would be helpful. I don't know whether FCA is in the business of being practical like that, but some of the responses and things like that were asking them to be, I think, in that paper.
Thank you. And the call for evidence, I'm going to ask probably 2 or 3 questions here. One of the key questions come up in our discussions with our clients is the breadth of coverage of the certification regime. People asking, is this too broad? They are literally covering hundreds and hundreds of front office staff. Is it effective? Is it needed?
Yeah, we kind of went through these questions early in the day, and I'm just wondering whether to change my answer.
Be honest.
Look, there's a whole industry in registrations, and I do. So my first point, which I made earlier, is I wonder what everybody is getting out of these registrations and these checks. They can all be done quite easily. I get it on a risk-based approach. You know, high-risk firms, as I said earlier. So with that caveat in mind, when I'm the compliance officer, I quite like it. All these other guys have to be registered and have a whole load of rules and comp restrictions and things like that. It's like good. So that's speaking as a compliance officer and MLRO. And I can see why the regulator likes it as well. It's probably too broad. It probably catches too many people. It's too much of an industry, is my answer to that.
Okay. So this is an interesting one, the interaction with the SMCR with other regulatory regimes. So lots of us work for international firms, and you have co-heads, co-management across different jurisdictions. How do they manage this in terms of the function, responsibilities? What if something goes wrong and they're going to point fingers at each other? How does it actually work in practice?
Yeah, so this is back to my be careful. So these roles are difficult because A, you want the role usually because you want to get promoted or whatever it is. So everyone is kind of falling over themselves to grab the SM role. Fantastic. I'm a compliance officer. But I think the trouble is you're not in control of your own destiny. So your boss is in the US. Everyone says, yeah, no, come on, matrix management, of course it works. Everyone just has to work well together. But, your boss is controlling the resources, he's controlling your pay, she's controlling your pay. They're designing the strategy. You go to your board with their strategy. Now, so it requires you to be strong, to put some traction in there to make sure it suits the purpose. And of course, the regime is designed to do that. And I like to think over the years I was pretty good at managing that, and I guess lots of people, if they were sitting here having been registered, would say the same. But it is difficult. It's really, really difficult. If a firm launches a cost-cutting strategy, are you really going to stand up and go, well, not in the UK? So it's difficult. So I think the matrix management thing is a problem, whatever the FCA say and however that is implemented. I think lots of other regions are starting to have similar rules, and so some of the people can be more sympathetic to you in that role now because they can see the rules in other places. And I think the reverse is sometimes true. So everyone says, well, why doesn't everyone go to the US? And if you work from a US bank, they do. But actually, the US managers are scared of the regime, actually. So often they're scared to put things in writing. They're scared. So those decisions that are passed down are done in a slightly strange way. So you have to be really careful about that. And I go back to the evidential thing. If you're in any of these senior managers roles, you really need to get your head around what records you keep and how you keep them for yourself, not just for the firm.
So I thought we'll ask ourselves some questions, wraparound questions. Is there a sort of broad consensus, do you think, that senior managers regime has worked and it is valid?
Well, personally, having been in that role, I think it makes a difference being in that role. I think everybody recognised that it's a difficult thing. I don't know whether we've got the stats on prosecutions, but maybe it hasn't been as effective in prosecuting people. I mean, I think actually the FCA should be really careful about taking action against compliance officers. If you're an absolute bad actor, I get it. But if you're not, and they go after compliance officers, that is going to that would set a really difficult tone for being in those roles. And you know, some of these roles are getting paid reasonably now, but some of them aren't. I'll give you the range and the drinks afterwards. Yeah, if you're at the bottom end of the range and you're taking that level of risk, it's interesting.
So the 95% of the 120 firms responded that SMCR was having a positive effect. 70% of the PRA supervisors found the SMCR helped them to take individuals to account. So that's an interesting fact for you. We'll come on to the enforcement in a minute. Do you think it's proportionate, the rules and regulators that the regulator set out, and is practical for the firms, the SMCR? What is the right balance?
It kind of looks lovely when you read it. But I think that it does feel the pressure when you're speaking to the regulator in one of those roles. I certainly felt a lot more pressure than if I hadn't been registered, and that just might be the noise around it. So I think it is. I think it's an effective regime in that respect. It's got traction, so it makes you do things differently, and I think it is concerning. So. I think it might be making people more careful and more wary, and that can be a problem.
Do you think SMCR review will result in significant change?
I'd like to think they could address some of the more process issues around the regime. That would be really helpful.
Maybe targeted enhancement, perhaps. We talked about enforcement. It would be very interesting to just quote this. So, in the discussion paper, SMCR is described as mostly a preventative regime, and for call for evidence, it describes SMCR as a proactive regime. And some people see this as a reflection of relative lack of enforcement actions, which is quite interesting. And what's your view on that?
Yeah, enforcement is difficult in whatever regime you're doing. It takes a long time. There's a whole lot of investigations. The firm goes into total defense mode. So I can see why some of those actions haven't come to fruition. If you want my opinion, I'm surprised, you know, there aren't more CEOs being tagged. So I'd leave the compliance officers and MLOs behind for one moment, but the CEOs and board members a little bit. And on non-executive directors, that's really, I'm fascinated about that. I mean, I think it's really important that they're registered, but it's really, really important that they're good. And I just wonder out loud about the extent of the challenge that NEDs give on boards. And I think the regulator would like that to be more. And if you're on the control side of the firm, I think you need the support of the NEDs.
So there were 63 open enforcement investigations under the SMCR as of June 2022, and four enforcement cases have been opened into non-financial misconduct, which we'll talk about in a minute. The threshold conditions team within the FCA opened further 10 cases into non-financial misconduct cases, which is quite interesting. And then out of 63, 39 of them into individuals linked to retail firms, and the rest 24 into wholesale firms.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have known those numbers off the top of my head. Obviously, we talked about them this morning.
Yeah.
But that speaks to the regime actually working, to be honest.
And then another sort of recent significant development is the PRA started fining on SMFs. As you know, the PRA fined the TSB CIO and then the former CEO of Wayline Bank as well, all recent, 23 and 24. So I think on the enforcement, the trend and the number of investigations are likely to go up and is coming. The problem is these investigations do take time, up to about 4 years. Just lastly, before we wrap up, just wanted to just touch upon non-financial misconduct, because this is a very big question. And FCA has been extremely vocal about this topic, whether this should be included in context of the SMCR or not.
Yeah, when we talked about this morning, I kind of raised my eyes skyward at this point. But actually, then we went through bullying, sexual harassment, and things like that. And actually, that is really significant. And so I'd be definitely on the side of including. I think it really shows that you're not going to be an effective manager if you don't understand all of that things. The reason I raised my eyes skyward is I once drove incredibly fast through Switzerland. And if you know anything about Swiss speeding laws, and I'm not advocating for driving fast, by the way, it was clearly stupid, it does present a different level of problem than if you do it anywhere else. So also, don't drive too fast.
And the FCA has very high expectations of firms in this area. Yeah. So when there is an investigation of non-financial misconduct in nature, they want you to consider whether this is in breach of the FCA or PRA code of conduct.
Actually, if I go back to the first question when I talk about references, you're never going to get this stuff out of a reference, and I don't quite know how you do it, but some of the ways you can do interviews now, maybe you can get some kind of better character thinking, but actually it is really important that you try and bottom this out in terms of senior manager. If you've got people who have characteristically been bullies in managers, and I've worked with a few CEOs who have that tendency. I think that is really dangerous in these firms, particularly when you're talking about risks. I think it can just create completely the wrong dynamic.
So we try to wrap the entire SMCR subject in 20 minutes and slightly over. Apologies for that. Do we have time for 1 or 2 questions? Who's in charge of the timing? Okay, 1 or 2 questions if there are any. You're scared of SMCR? Jean? Hi.
Hi, Seung. I was just wondering, then does that mean that possibly firms should be looking at social media?
I think they're already thinking about social media. They're absolutely thinking about it because it's one of their platforms, isn't it? Whether it's marketing, pushing out, talking to clients, absolutely. Okay, we'll try to. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.